MartiniInTheMorning.com coming up on 9:30 in the West. Joseph Sohm and Roger Kellaway in the studio. We've been talking about this for a long time. Steve Tyrell told me about Visions of America last year. Steve and I have been good friends since we got the idea to create this back on the radio here in Los Angeles. And Steve became the voice of the station and just keeps us abreast in all the stuff he's working on. And so Steve's been talking about Visions of America, and we've been really excited about coming to the West Coast. We'll tell you more about that. But a little bit of history about, let's see, it was 2004 or 5. We were working on a radio special. There happened to be a kind of a the stars and clouds and everything all came together at one time, and Kevin Spacey was working on a movie that had been talked about for a long time. Dick Clark had actually told us years and years ago that he wanted to do a movie about Bobby Darin. And so in 2000, what year was that? 2004?
I think it was 2003.
Was it 3?
Yeah, because we were doing the tour.
Right, and so
2001 we were working on the movie. We had our own. We had Stage 20 at Universal. We had our own room.
I mean, this was a long time in the making.
Yeah.
Because Dick had talked about the movie back in... He had an option that ran out somewhere in the late 80s or early 90s. And then Kevin Spacey, who told us that his mother had told him that she wanted him to do a movie about Bobby Darin. And... so the movie was in progress, and there was an album, a CD-DVD release at about the same time, a project called Aces Back to Back that featured some old video of Bobby Darin and a bunch of... Anyway, they both came out at about the same time, and we were approached by some folks involved with Bobby Darin's music to do a radio special to be broadcast all over the world about Bobby Darin. We interviewed Kevin Spacey, and we interviewed Steve Blauner was involved, Bobby Darin's longtime manager. Dodd Darin, Bobby's son, was involved in the project. So we were working on this radio special, and somebody said, you know who you ought to interview? You ought to interview Roger Kellaway, because not only has he worked with Bobby Darin, but he also is working with Kevin Spacey, and that's when we kind of got the drift on the movie project. You came up to the station, and we did this. It was a very interesting interview, because as we've been saying on the air about Roger, you've done everything.
Yeah.
Pretty much. I mean, you've done music, you've performed, you've done recorded music, you've done television, you've done movies.
Yeah.
Is there anything in the music business Roger Kellaway hasn't done?
I haven't done a Broadway show.
Is that in the future?
I don't know.
Well, this is. I mean, this is close. I mean,
Maybe.
this is Visions of America started out as what some people must have said to Joseph Sohm is a crazy idea, because your idea essentially was to photograph democracy. You guys are going to work off one mic, so you're probably going to lean a little.
Well, actually, nobody bothered to say it was a crazy idea, because the only guy I talked to about it was Roger, and he said it was a good idea. So, I mean, it's about democracy, and I had 2 votes out of 2.
I like that. So to back up, what were you doing that led you to this whole idea of photographing democracy?
Well, before I fell in love with photography, in my 20s, I had two love affairs besides occasional relationships with various women. One was I was a musician playing in jazz bands, jazz and pop bands, and the other was I was an American history teacher. So my musical, I started playing bass at age 18, and all the guys I was playing with started playing at 4. So I felt like I was at a permanent disadvantage. And the only wise thing I did was to choose an instrument that only played one note at a time, which was bass. So I became a bass player. And then ultimately my musical taste continued to grow and expand by listening to, Bill Evans, Joe Zawinul, Herbie Hancock. I mean, and suddenly the music I loved and then ultimately led to Roger, the cello quartets. The music I loved got better and better and better, but my ability of one-finger bass playing couldn't keep up. And ultimately, I found another career that gave me a one-finger pursuit, which was pushing the shutter of a camera. And that's kind of what I turned myself into, was a photographer that photographed the American story. So I kind of billed myself as America's photo historian. I tell the story of America with a camera. But my love for music was alive throughout. I just kind of quit playing, but 50% of the pictures I took was listening to music with headphones before there were Walkmans. So I would drive around back roads listening to music, taking pictures.
So then fast forward, the book came out in 2009. Was that right?
Correct.
And were you anticipating having Roger Kellaway set it to music even back then?
We started talking about it. We became friends when we both moved to Ojai at relatively the same time. In fact, the Kellaways and the Sohms, my wife Leslie and I, were looking at some of the same houses at the same time. And then we got to know each other. And then the more we talked, Roger learned of my love affair for America and photography, and his growing up in Boston and New England, and how it's intricately linked to the creation of America. And I don't know, it was probably over a glass of wine or three, and that we, no martinis were involved. So,
that's too bad.
So it was.
We can help you with that.
It was mainly red wine. But, we started discussing how much fun it might be to do a musical visual experience. At that point, it had no narration and it had no lyrics. So we were talking about music and images.
And it sounds like it sort of evolved. I mean, Clint Eastwood came in and did that was your doing, Roger? What led you to Clint Eastwood for the narration?
I think we discussed the fact that we liked the idea of Clint, and I knew Clint, so I called him and told him about the project, and he said, that sounds like a project I think I'd like to be involved with. So send me something about it. So Joe sent him some material, and he agreed to be our narrator.
You probably know this, but I'll share it with for our audience. You and Clint have an interesting connection, in that the first time we saw Beyond the Sea, the Bobby Darin biopic that you were involved in, we met Kevin Spacey afterwards. We were sitting with Bobby's manager, Steve Blauner, and he took us up to meet Kevin Spacey, whom I had interviewed, but on the phone I had met him. And Steve told him a little about our radio station, and Steve said to Kevin, this is before the soundtrack came out, Steve said to Kevin Spacey, Brad's radio station plays a song that you sing. And Kevin looked at me and he said, what song are you playing? And I said, we're playing That Old Black Magic from the movie Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, which was directed by Clint Eastwood. And he had to convince, the story I'm told, he had to convince Kevin to sing in the movie. Apparently he wasn't very comfortable with the idea, and that was a long time before you and Kevin Spacey started working on the music for Beyond the Sea in 2001.
Yes.
I mean, that was a project.
Yeah. Well, I don't think anybody knew that Kevin was Juilliard trained. He could sing. I was also in that movie. I was in the soundtrack.
In Midnight?
I didn't
know that.
In the movie, there was an elderly lady that Clint was.
You were the elderly lady?
Yeah, she played piano in a bar, and Clint loved her, but she kept changing songs every 30 seconds, so he couldn't get like a 2-minute shot of her.
Right.
So Lenny Niehaus, who was doing the music, called me and said, Clint wants you to imitate. Here's 3 songs, and Clint wants you to imitate this lady and the way she plays. So I worked it up. I got completely comfortable with it, and then I got to Warner Brothers, and they gave me 3 songs that I'd never seen. But somehow I knew her style, so that's.
I had no idea that the connection was even deeper.
Completely about that. But see, 2000 is when Joe and I did the first demo for Visions of America.
Oh, so this is a project the two of you have been talking about for a long time.
Oh, yeah, and working on for a long time.
Because Joe, you
never grounded till 2008.
Really? And you worked on the photos for like 3 decades.
3 decades.
It's amazing.
Sometimes an idea takes a quarter of a second, and the execution of it takes 3 decades.
That's wild.
But that was this idea. And so it's really 2 big ideas. One, to photograph, as I'm saying, democracy. And the second is to translate the pictures into what we're calling a photo symphony concert for America. So either one of those are something that a quarter of a second does it, but it's a decade of execution. And we've, I mean, I'm just speaking from my point of view, but there are the primary collaborators now are Roger, and he can also speak about Alan and Marilyn Bergman, and myself, and I'm wearing a double hat, and under both of them I'm bald. And one is a photographer and the other is writer, but it's just really, there's a lot of moving components to this. So the photographs became the basis for Roger's musical interpretations. So I described it a little more like a tennis match. I throw the ball to him, say, here's all these pictures I took. He throws the ball back to me. Here's the music. So then I kind of reinterpret what he did, just like he interpreted what I did. Then the Bergmans come in from the flank, with how about these lyrics? And then I came in, well, how about this narration? So putting the pieces together is, it's not your typical, quote, Americana portrait. There are elements that are Rockwellian for sure, but there are other parts that clearly are the underside or the shadow side of the American dream.
Joseph Sohm and Roger Kellaway, like the lady who couldn't stay with one song for more than 30 seconds or so, I'm going to flip back and forth on subjects a little bit, as we already have, and I thought this would be an appropriate thing to share with you from MartiniInTheMorning.com, Kevin Spacey. MartiniInTheMorning.com, Bobby Darin from the movie Beyond the Sea, and the guy who, what all did you do on that movie, Roger? Roger Kellaway in the studio? Nothing? Nothing at all?
What happened was, as I said before, we had our own soundstage at Universal.
Right.
I had masking tape blocking out a 45-piece orchestra for Kevin.
45
because the
piece.
only thing I ever had with Bobby was 10 strings, and I said, I'm not doing that. I'm doing 24 strings. I'm doing a big band like the WDR Big Band. We had a runway for Kevin. We had a guy on one edge of the studio that could push a button and call up any piece of video on Bobby ever.
Wow.
And that was ahead of Kevin.
Wow.
On an LED screen, and then there were 2 mirrors on either side of the runway so Kevin could watch how he moved.
Right.
This was all happening until 9/11. After 9/11, everything changed. We lost the studio, and eventually it all ended up in Europe.
Right, in Germany, wasn't it?
Well, I think it was German funding.
Okay,
but the problem with England is you need a person. For instance, Kevin was the star. He was the director. He was the writer. He was the producer. So that's 4 people that he was taking the place of. And ultimately, I had to give up doing the score.
Wow. But you basically trained him. You made him the performer he became.
Yeah, I did, and there was nobody knew where the original music was. So I wrote 34 arrangements for an 11-piece band, which Phil Ramone and I recorded in Capitol Studio A, for Kevin to play in his Porsche and sing along. Now, I'll just tell you a funny story about what happened with the tour, because that's when we came together again.
Right.
We go to the first rehearsal. We've got the whole big band there, and there's no music. Nobody knows where the music is. Supposedly the music is in England.
Oh, no.
So finally, one piece of music came through, and that's all we ever got from England, and that was Mac the Knife.
Oh, no.
Probably the last piece that I wanted to have come through. That's all we had.
Wow.
So what I did was call Susie Katayama, who was the copyist on all those 34 charts, and I said, where are the 34 charts? She said, well, I don't know, we're moving. So she found them, Xeroxed them, and we had 4 trumpet players, but only 2 trumpet parts. So they had, anyway, a lot of pencils came out.
That's amazing.
And that's how we did the 13 cities with my charts.
We should explain and we're sending our email newsletter out in just a couple of minutes, and it has a link to both Joseph Sohm's bio and Roger Kellaway's. And we were going to try to discuss their background completely on the air here, but we realized that would take the entire time that we have to have the conversation, because these 2 guys have done everything. But we should explain your role with Bobby Darin was when and what?
66 for 3 years. I was his musical director. I did everything. I took dictation.
Wow.
Because I've only worked for 2 people in my life that I thought were absolutely total experts on themselves. Bobby Darin and Streisand.
Wow.
Both Tauruses, by the way, for whatever that means. And then Bobby gave me, at the end of 1 year, he gave me Dr. Dolittle. We were the first ones to do Dr. Dolittle after the movie.
Roger Kellaway on Martini in the Morning with Joseph Sohm. Together they've come up with Visions of America, and I knew I'd get a little sidetracked on the Bobby Darin and all that stuff, because that was a fascinating project. We saw you guys do the show here in L.A., and that was right as the movie was coming out, I think, about the same time.
Yes.
And one of the stories that came out during that time, and it was an artist that we play here on MartiniInTheMorning.com. A young guy was in the studio, and somehow the movie came up, and he said, "I'm in the movie." And I said, "You're kidding." He said, "No." And he said, "The strangest thing happened." The story was about this singer and pianist who had gone into a New York music store looking for sheet music. He was working with Phil Ramone on an album project. And Phil asked him to pick out any songs. Phil had a list of songs he wanted to use, and he asked this artist, he said, "If you have any other songs you want to try, bring in the music and we'll work on it." So this kid picks up some sheet music, takes it into the studio, starts playing the song, and Phil says, "Well, that's not the way that song goes." And the kid had never heard the original version of that song. But the even funnier part of it was Peter Cincotti's version of Sway. But the funniest part of that was in that music store. He's the owner of the store is asking him, what he's doing, what he's been doing lately, and Peter said, "Oh, I'm working on a movie about Bobby Darin." And the guy said, "Really? What are you playing?" He said, "I'm playing some guy named Dick Berkey." And the guy from the music store says,
"That's the truth." Yeah.
The guy from the music store says, "Hold on a minute." Picks up the phone, calls this guy, and he said, "Here, talk to Peter Cincotti." And Peter Cincotti said, "Hi, who's this?" And the guy said, "Dick Berkey."
Yeah.
And Peter had no idea. Young. He was 19, 20 maybe at the time.
Yeah, very young.
Yeah. There were some great.
But Berkey was the first pal, I think, of Bobby's, and the first arranger. And there were still some things when I was with him. There was still some arrangements in his book that were by Berkey.
Really?
Yeah.
There were some funny stories that came out surrounding that movie. The whole way that Kevin came upon the movie, and the fact that you worked with him, and I heard a story from Joe Mantegna, said that he had worked with Bobby on Dialogue and some other. A lot of people got involved. A lot of people really wanted that to happen.
He got Bobby.
Kevin. I meant
Kevin.
Yeah.
Kevin brought a lot of people into the studio while we were.
Really?
He and I were rehearsing. And he'd say, "This is Roger Kellaway, my accompanist." And I took him to the side. I said, "Please, don't call me your accompanist. I'm your musical director. It's a lot more classy."
Roger Kellaway and Joseph Sohm, Visions of America. I've never seen the book. This is and what I've been
book.
What I've been doing as we've been sitting here talking. I don't know if you noticed. I just opened it to different. That looks like that's out near Ojai, isn't it?
Yeah, that's Upper Ojai.
It's just funny. I just happened to turn to it, and Ojai. If you're not familiar with it, you've heard us talk about it on MartiniInTheMorning.com. We have a sponsor who has her business in Ojai. She makes jams and pickles and things. Her name, Katie. Can't think of her last name. Katie's Famous Jams. Anyway, so we've talked about Ojai a lot. but it's a really special place.
It is.
And it obviously led the two of you. You're originally from, Joe?
St. Louis.
St. Louis.
Which is kind of part of the storyline that I have Clint Eastwood, in essence, saying my story. But, and part of it is that my story and Search for America began off of Route 66, honest to God, where we would play when we grew up. And ironically, I learned only recently Route 66 ends where we're finishing our concerts at the Santa Monica Pier.
That's right. Yeah, there's a marker there.
I'm fine.
Have you seen the sign there?
The where the end of Route
Yeah, it says Route 66 ends here.
Yeah.
So, in fact, Roger has written with Alan and Marilyn Bergman a kind of retro Route 66 homage of sorts that Steve Tyrell was one of the primary reasons we wanted him to sing, because it's a very kind of finger snapping upbeat thing in order to see all these back roads. Because I mean, that's basically my thing. Is I'm the back road guy. I shoot the cities. I shoot all kinds of presidential, all kinds of stuff. But the fun stuff is the back roads.
I shoot the back road.
It sounds like a song coming on.
Yeah.
I feel a song coming
Who's
on.
that guy? Yeah, yeah, the bit.
Had to be there.
It was a good bit.
It's a good bit.
But you know what? One of the things you were saying when you were talking about Bobby Darin is maybe you get Roger to share the one thing that I found fascinating with Roger would share about what he learned from Bobby running a stage show, working with him on stage. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Well, before Bobby, I worked with Jackie Leonard for a year, and I have always said I got my stage timing from Jackie Leonard and Bobby Darin. That's where I learned as a conductor. When people applaud at the end of the song, you don't let the applause die out before you start the next song. Otherwise, you're dead.
No dead air, kind of like on the radio.
And there were Bobby said to me, every time I turn around, I expect to see you looking at me. I said, okay. And how do I do that and conduct the orchestra at the same time? He said, that's your problem. And the other thing he said to me was, if I'm down emotionally, don't you be down. I need for you to be up. Don't go where I am.
Wow. That's kind of like the way it is around here, huh? You have a question? Mother Miriam has a question. But you got to get real close to that mic because that's the one that's
probably has nothing to do with the show, but something that you just said. And he was rather young when he was talking to you about that, right? Bobby Darin?
Yeah.
I mean, didn't you just want to smack him in the face?
I was
Well, he was
not.
young, too.
No, I had lines like that in '59 from Ralph Martiri when I was playing bass in his big band. He used to say, "You have a small combo sound," which is a slap in the face. But I took it as something to learn from.
See, you're very much the professional.
Bobby was always on edge, but
Was
there
he?
was something to learn from this aggressive edge and all that energy and how he
Were you the same age as
used
him?
the stage. No,
Were you the same age?
no. I was a few years younger, I think.
Oh.
I was 26 when I joined him.
Oh.
And
Okay, well that shut me up.
No, but it's an interesting observation though, because you with your musical background, Bobby's got his own ideas and own ways. I mean, it would seem that two creative people could clash a little bit.
we got along because Bobby couldn't do what I did.
He couldn't do the arrangements.
And then when I left him, he did several albums where he arranged the songs and proved that he couldn't
didn't
do
do
what
very
I
well,
did.
right? Yeah, because after you guys parted, I mean, his career kind of got a little.
The last time I remember seeing him at the Troubadour, and it was Bob Darin.
I remember that phase.
No toupee.
Right, I remember that phase.
I forget what you call the felt shoes. felt shoes with no shoelaces.
Hush puppies?
And all jeans.
Yeah.
Monogrammed shirt.
Doesn't work. Disconnect.
He took himself apart one piece at a time, and the last thing to go was the monogrammed shirt said BD on the cuffs.
That's too funny.
Okay, I really have another question. This is about the show. Now, I hope that you haven't answered this or asked him this before, but the show with the photography.
Visions of America you're talking about.
Yeah. How does the music come in? In other words, is it
Lean
like,
into the microphone with me.
Is it like a Broadway show where you're going to show pictures and then possibly Steve or what other vocalists are going to sing over the photography?
It's more like a film, because the photos, although they're stills mostly, the photos go from beginning to end.
Right.
And the music is as if I scored the film. We divided it up into different sections. And some of those sections contain songs, which are Steve Tyrell and Judith Hill. And some of them are jazz piano solos.
You playing the piano?
Yeah.
Fabulous.
I'm not letting anybody else do that yet.
I don't blame you. No.
No, Roger is pretty much the auteur in this, because it's his score.
It's his
then
baby.
He did the songs. Then he did the arrangements, and then he's the featured soloist on piano.
Roger, are you hard to work with?
No.
Okay. You have that very stern look.
It's early in the morning.
And a long drive
Yeah,
in Southern California
Joe, on
traffic.
the other hand, smiling, and Roger, you're very serious. And I was hesitant to come over and ask a question
You shouldn't be.
because I didn't know whether
You always
or not-
butt in.
Well, that's this is royalty sitting here.
We have to take a chance, and then you say.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
And speaking of royalty, I mean, how did this evolve to the point where Marilyn and Alan Bergman got involved and created lyrics for these? Now, let me take a step back. The songs that they wrote lyrics for, did they write the lyrics to songs that existed within the score, or did you retool some of it to make it work with a lyric?
Actually, the way it ended up, both. We originally wrote a song for Carmen McRae in 1972 called, their title was "I Have the Feeling I've Been Here Before." Then we didn't write anything again until this show, but I asked them if they'd like to be involved, and so we went ahead and we wrote what is our anthem song called "We the People," and then we wrote another song called "To the Eyes of a Star," and those were the two songs that were originally written for the first draft of the show. Then I have a song which was just called "Town and Country," and Alan says that needs a lyric. So that became "A Place That You Want to Call Home." That became the third song. And then we added 3 keys because they wanted to do something that was "Give Me Another Brother, Can You Spare a Dime?" So we did that one. And then there's the Route 66 song, "An Open Road's an Open Door," which is another one of Steve Tyrell's songs. He sings that in 3 keys.
You guys debuted this, if memory serves me from reading press clippings and so on, in Philadelphia.
Yep.
2 or 3?
4 years.
2009.
4 years ago, almost exactly.
Oh, about the same time the book came out.
Yeah. Actually, it's kind of ironic because most of my life has been, quote, acquiring photographs, and they're published. I've been published a couple 100,000 times around the world.
Wow.
So I'm probably easily the most published Americana photographer. Part of that statement is because the internet didn't exist and my stuff is just blasted out around the world. However, I first got the idea when I attended at the Kennedy Center on 9/11/2002, when then President Bush, Dick Cheney, Ted Kennedy, Colin Powell, Tom Brokaw, et cetera, did this tribute to memorial to 9/11 1 year after, and the National Symphony Orchestra was performing, and I personally was never. My love affair with music was always intact. It was just a question of when I would turn that burner on again. And so the National Symphony Orchestra, under the conductor was Slatkin, Lenny Slatkin, who is a fan of Roger's, and he conducted throughout, and my images were projected throughout the entire concert that NBC television broadcast worldwide. So when I came out of there, the Washington Post the next day said the highlight of the concert, I mean, it had more major muckety-mucks than I've ever seen in my whole life. They said the highlight of it was the sublime imagery of the American landscape. So I kept thinking, you know, rather than inventing something or a multimedia genre or sorts, why don't we just work within the existing symphony structure? So that was the journey where ultimately I realized, well, if you were going to create this after Roger and I started, who would be the ideal presenter? And it seems like, since America is born in Philly, so I took it to the Philadelphia Orchestra, and they mostly turned it down, but then they called me back 3 weeks ago and said, we've been thinking about what you talked about. It shouldn't be the Philadelphia Orchestra. It should be Peter Narrow and the Philly Pops. So, and then I'll pass it to Roger. But then I asked Roger, well, Roger, do you know Peter Narrow? And this was Roger's response.
Yeah, I know Bernie.
Bernie?
Neiro. Bernie and I worked opposite each other in Chili's in New York in the early 60s.
Really?
I was playing bass opposite him with a pianist named Phil Rudy. And when I sat in a couple of times, and when Bernie left to become Peter Narrow, he recommended to Jilly that I take his place on piano. And we hadn't seen each other since that time.
And then fast forward to this project.
Yeah. But I'll slip in one little story. He was talking about Lenny Slatkin. Well, his mother, Eleanor Slatkin, played cello, and she played first cello on my Bobby Darin Sings Dr. Dolittle album.
Wow.
Which, incidentally, was done at what it's now Ocean Way. It was called Western One, 35-piece orchestra, 4 tracks. And that means 3 tracks for the orchestra because there's only 1 track for vocal. And every time you overdub, you have to wipe out the track you already have.
Wow.
So that's
process.
The beginnings of, I don't think I go back to 2 tracks stereo, but I do remember 4 track.
Roger Kellaway, the composer and guy who's done just about everything in music. Joseph Sohm took the pictures. It's portraits, visions of America. And so we're going to get off the subject. Are you guys, how quickly do you need to drive back to Ojai? We're here. We're a little long. You got some time?
Here.
All right. So while we do this, somebody was asking. I saw in our Martini in the Morning chat lounge, people get in there and talk and interact, and they were saying, "Well, who's Roger? What's he done?" Here's one of the things he was involved in from the movie Beyond the Sea. And I know there's a whole lot more, but I'm kind of fixated on that. It's MartiniInTheMorning.com. Kevin Spacey, song that actually became kind of a love theme throughout the movie. Once Upon a Time, Kevin Spacey on Martini in the Morning. MartiniInTheMorning.com. It's Kevin Spacey from the movie Beyond the Sea, a project Roger Kellaway was intimately acquainted with. That's an amazing story that you guys went into a studio and worked for the better part of 2 years to get him ready for that movie.
Yeah.
I mean, that's commitment.
Yeah. I didn't know he was a singer.
I think most people didn't.
No, nobody really knows that. But he's Juilliard trained, and he's fine.
But it was funny when I told him that we were playing, that we played his version of that old Black Magic from Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. He looked at me and he said, "Why?" That was a pretty classic reaction. You, Mother Miriam's got some questions from our chat, and we'll go to that in a second. But you, off the air, we've often said we do a lot of interviews here, and a lot of people in the music business, and we've often said that we should run a camera during the songs while folks are listening to songs, because some of the most interesting conversations happen.
Sure.
And you and I were talking about. I've talked to a couple of people in my career who had the opportunity to work with Barbra Streisand, who's an artist both on screen and singing, an artist that I've always admired. But various people who've worked with her have various stories, and you must have some interesting. Well, first of all, what did you do with Barbra Streisand?
A Star Is Born.
That's one of the. I was just telling Roger off the air that we my wife and I did a Barbra Streisand marathon a few weekends ago, and we watched. That's one of the movies we watched. Such a great movie. Her and Chris Christopherson, the chemistry, and just a fun movie. What was your role?
Well, here's the interesting thing about that. I orchestrated Invictus. Here we go full circle now. I orchestrated and conducted Invictus for Clint Eastwood. And I'm walking into the Eastwood soundstage. That is the soundstage where we did A Star Is Born. It was like, wow.
Deja vu.
Like, oh, man.
All over again.
And it hasn't been changed.
Really?
You know, they haven't they've digitized it. It's still that great old studio. Fabulous.
So your Barbra Streisand experience is good?
It was real interesting for me because I had just finished the EST training. Remember Werner Erhardt's EST?
Mm-hmm.
So Barbara has a predilection for changing her mind every 15 seconds in the quest for perfection, which drives a lot of people crazy. But it didn't drive me crazy because I just finished the EST training. It was like, okay, she wants to be that way. That's all right, fine. I can take that. The orchestra got crazy for me. But then we had no budget. Completely open-ended because it was Barbara.
Wow.
So that meant instead, every time you change an instrument, you create a 50% salary increase. So every time she changed her mind, I changed my mind. And it was completely fine. The only thing that threw me was at 9 o'clock on 9 a.m. on the first date. The first day of scoring, I recorded the first piece and I walked into the booth and she said, "Why'd you write that?" And that was a little dejected. I spent all night rewriting that, half of it, and came back and the next day and resold it to her.
Which one? Which?
I don't know which the first cue was. We don't always start at the beginning of the picture. I don't remember.
I mean, I've got the video. I've got everything.
Yeah, me too.
One of my favorites.
I mean, it is a great score and such a variety of music too. I mean, from Chris Christopherson being the rock guy to
and of course all of my stuff. It is just the underscore.
Right. Yeah.
And Phil Ramone said at the end, there are so many arrangers on this because I was the last guy. There were 16 bars on Evergreen that she didn't like. I got to do those.
Wow.
So now that becomes at least 2 arrangers on Evergreen. Phil only listed the arrangers. He couldn't list the credits because so many arrangers had worked on so many songs.
MartiniInTheMorning.com. We're talking about Visions of America and many other things with Joseph Sohm and Roger Kellaway. Joseph, the photographer and historian, and Roger, who set it all to music. And Mother Miriam has been taking questions from our chat lounge.
Well, actually, this isn't a question. This is something I just realized, and I think our listeners, especially in the LA area, should know about. On Sunday, January 27th...
That's the Santa Monica show.
The Santa Monica show. There's very special things happening. For $250, it's going to be a concert and gala seating. Now, what does that mean?
That's 2 separate events, though. The $250 is for dinner, and the gala, which celebrates the Bergmans, Alan and Marilyn Bergman, and Alan and Judith Hill and Steve Tyrell and myself are all going to sing.
Wow!
Now
we're all going to sing songs
fabulous.
of Alan and Marilyn's.
Really? So songs that aren't necessarily in Visions of America?
That's correct. Yes.
Oh, wow.
Alan is going to do Windmills of Your Mind. Judith is going to do How Do You Keep the Music Playing.
Ooh.
Steve's going to do Nice and Easy. I'm going to do I Have the Feeling I've Been Here Before. And then Alan's going to do The Way We Were.
How can you not get tickets for this, people? How?
Well,
Yeah. Why would you?
can't.
Why would you not
do it?
but that's not connected to the 4 o'clock performance of the
Exactly.
New West Symphony.
Thank you
Yeah.
for
But what
saying
you
that.
should also say that the $250, where does it go? It goes to the New West Symphony, and if people don't know who the New West Symphony is, it's mostly studio musicians that when they're not doing a Spielberg film, they'd really rather be playing Mozart and Beethoven. So New West, who has a brand new conductor from Brazil, and his name is Marcelo Leninger, and my wife and I have seen him several times, and as has Roger now. There are many conductors, but this guy is extremely gifted. He's the number 2 at the Boston Symphony Orchestra, but he became elevated very high when James Levine was unable to conduct for health reasons. So Marcelo took over. So when he came to Southern California, this is brand new. So this his conducting Visions of America is not only a departure for him, but it's really one of his first strong imprints.
Isn't that fantastic?
This is a really, I mean, this is a really unique thing. You've done this
Yeah.
in the Boston Pops. Wasn't this sort of the underpinning for their
Yes.
season last year?
Yeah.
Yeah, we did the Boston Pops in May and June. Not only performed our concert, they were so swept away by the concept, they ended up naming their entire concert season Visions of America. Sometimes that included other videos, like to Gershwin, Love is Sweeping the World, or Sweeping the Country, or and my images would be to that. But they also had Bernadette Peters, Steve Martin, former U.S. Senator Alan Simpson, numbers of other people doing other elements, but all under this umbrella of Visions of America. But when they finally performed ours, we did 8 total concerts, and for my guess, I'm estimating around 2,000 people per concert, 2,500. So we did close to 20,000 people, including the Harvard alumni, the Tufts alumni, BU alumni, MIT, and it was particularly appropriate because Roger also was just recently given an honorary PhD from the New England
Conservatory.
so his alma mater.
Appropriate.
So much happening.
So, but to wrap what your point up earlier about
God, I had a point.
yeah,
I rarely do.
well, about Roger learning from Bobby Darin about never let the applause stop. Some of the improvements that we're attempting to do was that observation was the same thing Alan Bergman was saying, that the way the piece is organized, and tipping my hat to the founders, there's 13 pieces of music for the 13 original colonies. So it's mostly organized, and there are exceptions of a piece of music, whether song or instrumental, then it kind of dies down, fades out to Roger on piano and Clint Eastwood telling the story. Just a little bit of the story, because it's mostly a musical visual experience. But the space between the pieces of music was giving it a sense of too many starts and stops, start and stop, start and stop, and it directly relates to what Bobby Darin was saying. So now, rather, we have kind of taken the spine of it and brought it together so that there's much more of a flow. So we've moved from a 3-movement concerto to more or less now a continued piece.
Marilyn and Alan Bergman, arguably the 2 of the greatest songwriters of our time, and in fact, you just mentioned Stars Born. Didn't they have a song on that?
I think they did several.
Yeah, and then
Paul Williams did Evergreen.
Right, and
I
Kenny
think
Loggins, I Believe in Love. And
yeah.
It's one of my favorite soundtracks ever. It's a great. I mean, it's a great movie. But
well, they're masters of words.
They are.
I've been very fortunate in that.
Who wrote the last one when she was standing, the last frame of the movie? Who wrote that? I love that. I mean, it was.
Hey, she became the director, don't you think? That whole last song was in close up.
Right. Yeah.
That's all I can remember. I can't even remember the song.
You can't remember?
No.
Oh, Look at Me Now, and then she goes into. I just loved it when she did. I mean, it showed.
Well, she took the song that was
You're
Clint Eastwood,
Watching Me
or
Now.
You know, it's been kind of 20
starts
years
off
since I've
slow.
seen this.
20 years since you've seen it.
Oh, probably.
Do you go back
I just
often?
bought it. Because no films that I've done in the past have now become available on DVD. There's one film I did in 1980, which I thought was the best score I ever wrote, which was a horror film called The Silent Scream, is now available. And the Mafu Cage is also available, which I use prepared pianos, but that's a completely different.
That's the question I was going to ask you, though. With movies that you've scored, do you trot them out every once in a while and remember your work, or is it just on to the next thing?
Yeah, it's mostly on to the next thing. I don't really sit and my wife Georgiana would say I don't spend enough time listening to what I've already done.
You're just working on whatever's next. Those ideas that come up in a quarter of a second. It's martiniinthemorning.com. Roger Kellaway, Joseph Sohm, and you were talking about Marilyn and Alan Bergman. One of the song that Alan Bergman will do in this event on Sundays on martiniinthemorning.com. martiniinthemorning.com. Alan Bergman. Always fun hearing the songwriter do their song, whether they're a great singer or not. Sadly, first time I ever heard Alan sing was at a memorial service for Steve Tyrell's late wife. And he got up and he said, "I'm not a singer, but boy," he did the song "A Love Like Ours," and which was a favorite of Steve and Stephanie's, and the emotion. I mean, again, there's just something very. I worked in country for a while, and because songwriting, the words and the stories are which is probably why I like these two styles of music, because it's all about there's this. And I, as a composer, I don't mean to take anything away from what you do.
No. I can't tell you how much I've learned from Alan and Marilyn about story, about how to look at the lyrics as story.
Right. And that's what this music, the way they write.
That's what they do.
He's telling, and when I saw him on stage that night at that memorial, he was telling this emotion-filled story about his friend he had lost, and they're just amazing what they do with words and what they do with. I'm anxious to hear these songs because this is. I don't even have a sense of the music, so this is kind of an abstract thing to say, but I'm anxious to hear them doing songs about Joseph Sohm's vision of America. I mean, it just sounds like something maybe a little different for them.
Well, they were very inspired by Joe's photographs and very intent on studying the photographs that were meant to depict each section, like Native Americans, for instance. They didn't write a song for that, but the town and country song that I wrote and the photographs that he used that became a place that you want to call home. It's very important for them to understand. It's like reading a script. And in fact, it is a script because of the narrations.
Did you ever do a movie?
Whoa, here we go.
Did you ever do a movie?
Miriam, microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry. Would you ever do a movie like this? About this? Could
we're
it be done?
We're talking
We're
about
discussing it right now.
If you wanted to ask me if I ever do another movie, a basic answer is no.
Really?
But
you don't want to score another movie?
You know, I don't, except for about 2 or 3 people, I don't think anybody understands anything about movie music anymore. They're absolutely brainwashed by things that have happened in television with synthesizers, and they're, you know, everything about a film is theme driven, except the music. I mean, for 98% of the scores now.
Oh, you're talking now.
Because the directors and producers, well, now I can talk 30 years ago. They don't understand theme driven anymore. It's like, oh no, that's old fashioned.
That's why there are very few songs that are really, really popular, like The Way We Were. You don't have that anymore. All these movies from the Golden Globes, have you ever heard one song from it that you could hum?
Hey, please, Skyfall? Give me a break. You know why that won? Because they like Adele.
Oh,
right.
Okay.
Please.
Roger Kellaway, the songwriter, composer Roger Kellaway, and Joseph Sohm, Visions of America. Okay, so let's, way off subject, but since we're talking about that, on martiniinthemorning.com, we have become fans of a fellow band leader named Ron Jones, who works with Seth MacFarlane on the three.
I just met him about 4 weeks ago at Vitello's.
He's a terrific band leader, funny guy, writer, and Seth MacFarlane is such a departure from everybody else doing what he does. I mean, he does some episodes of his show where Ron and Walter Murphy are writing and arranging for 90 or 95 pieces and doing some pretty elaborate music. I mean, do you see that as sort of the opposite of what you were saying about movies, or is it?
Yes, I do. And I go, hey, thank God. Ron said we have 72 musicians at least every week, and wow. I listen to it, it's big band, it's all acoustic. Yeah, because Seth knows what that music is, and he understands the value of it.
And it
has to do with the heart.
Absolutely.
You can't. I've played synthesizers for many, 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 many years, and I've played most of them. But in the end, they're all synthetic. That's what they are. They don't make anything that really relates to the heart.
And that wouldn't work with this, because what we're looking at in these pictures, this is, as I flip through this
kind of haunting.
It's emotional.
Yeah.
It is. This is an emotional. The book is called Visions of America. What do you? Photo Symphony.
Yeah, Photo Symphony. Yeah.
It's funny because I started calling it that, and I didn't, because I don't. I mean, this is the thing that and this is the reason we wanted to share this with our audience, and we're going to wrap this up and let you guys go. But I wanted to share this with our audience because it's so different from anything anybody is doing. At least in my opinion, it seems very different, and this is a very special thing that you guys have done.
Well, this is also a very interesting departure for Judith Hill, who is what, 25?
Yeah.
Judith Hill, when I first found out when Steve first told me about her, she was about to go out on the road with Michael Jackson.
That's correct.
On his last concert tour.
That's right.
And then he left us, and I don't remember. I know Steve told me how they wound up together, but she's on his album, I'll Take Romance. She does a duet with him. Yeah, I was to be honest, I mean, I knew Patty Austin had performed this with Steve previously. That was in Boston.
Yes.
And Philly.
And Philly. And now, fast forward to the West Coast events that are coming up next weekend, she's doing this with Steve. How did that come about?
Well, it came about because of Steve. But I had trepidations about the first rehearsal.
Really?
But when we started actually getting into a place that you want to call home, she actually ended up singing it, and it was really, really interesting. Now at rehearsal 2 days ago at Allen and Maryland's, I have the feeling I've been here before, just because I wanted Allen and Maryland to hear it. They hadn't heard it in 20 years. And at the end of it, Judith said, gee, I wish they wrote songs like that today. And I kind of went, really?
Yeah, like you, right?
Well, we agree with you. I said the main reason is because instrumental music, for the most part, has gone away.
Right.
You still have instrumental music, but you don't have instrumental music covering the songs that are being written these days, because the songs that are being written don't have to be covered by 300 people in order for the publishing company, to make their money, because they've got somebody that is exceptionally cute. But my wife says cute or nerdy or something. And they sell 500 million CDs and they make their money the first time out. So they don't care if anybody else sings a song.
Right.
So now you have songs that aren't songs.
We talk about that.
That's where we come in.
We talk about that. We do a thing on Tuesdays called Twin Spin Tuesdays, where we show how the songs that were written during the Great American Songbook period, if you will, which I think is still there, but not quite in the forefront as it was at one time. But these songs, these guys were writing music. They were selling sheet music, and they wanted everybody to record the song. So the song had to be done in a way, at least our interpretation of this is the songs had to be done in a way that any artist could take the song and put their own stamp on it and make it their own. And that's not the way songs are written today.
Not anymore.
It's the opposite.
Yeah.
There's one guy that you really should pay attention to, and that's Adam Gettle.
No,
and this is Richard Rodgers' grandson. And he writes a song. I get goosebumps just thinking about it because it's so musical. he writes like arias in his Broadway shows.
Really?
He's done a thing called Come to Jesus with Audra McDonald. Unbelievable.
Really?
The level of music and harmony and structure and yeah.
Well,
so there is hope.
He certainly comes by it naturally.
Yeah.
MartiniInTheMorning.com. The book, the photo symphony. It's called Visions of America. Just flipping through the book, I mean, it's breathtaking. There's some breathtaking photos, but you've done, I mean, this isn't all you've done in terms of photos. You said you've been published how many thousand times?
200,000 times, but I've kind of almost lost count. I mean, I'll be flying on an airplane and going to the men's room and seeing people reading magazines that would have one of my pictures, or seeing, I'm in this case, I'm like a studio player. You don't know who's playing on the backtrack, but so my photos, the way they're published, you'd have to pull the spine of a book apart to see my name in tiny, tiny type. You know what's so great about you? You have no ego, or if you do, you sure didn't show it. You have no ego. You're, both of you, incredibly talented, have a fabulous background, and you just sit like, hey, this is the way it is. And it's amazing.
Well, he has no ego. I make up for it.
Do you really?
Well,
I find that it's wonderful.
And we're going to wrap this up in just a second, but I have to tell you something funny that I was worried about, because I haven't met Joseph. We met briefly a few years ago, but I knew that I would have, because we're a music radio station and because many things that Roger's been involved in. I mean, we play a lot of music that Roger's responsible for, or we play music by people he's worked with. I mean, the list goes on. But my fear was that we would, and I've done this before. I had an artist, a singer that we play occasionally. She brought in a fellow who she works with. He's kind of a band leader, but he's an artist in his own right. And because I knew a lot about him and his career, and this other artist, we've been friends for a long time, I figured it was okay. So I spent more time talking with this other fellow that I'd never interviewed before. And I was afraid of getting into that same situation, because I know a lot about Roger Kellaway. So and again, our listeners know Bobby Darin. He's one of the core artists for what we do. And Joseph, I was so afraid that I would give you short shrift here, because I mean, this all started with you and your camera.
Yeah, and a love affair for America and a love affair for music. And so, there's a great story about Ansel Adams, the photographer, who at a certain point in his 12, 13, he was on a dual course. He was going to be a classical pianist or a photographer. And ultimately, the way I heard the story is that his parents forced him to make a decision whether to be a pianist or whether to be a photographer. And he was very skilled as a pianist and could have easily pursued that, but instead he chose a different path. And that's another thing that I think is analogous to music, is that the book's subtitle is Photographing Democracy, which suggests the question, how do you photograph democracy, which is, after all, the central idea of American civilization. So I ultimately concluded that democracy was the perfect metaphor for classical music, because it's many different instruments and voices coming together as one voice, and that is democracy. And at the same time is jazz, because jazz has structure and it has room for individuals taking solos, and then it comes back to the theme and it ends. And jazz is America's greatest export, maybe in country western as well. But it just seemed like democracy in jazz, democracy in orchestral music, personifies the idea of the founders, e pluribus unum, out of many comes one.
Wow.
Visions of America, Photographing Democracy. Joseph Sohm, Roger Kellaway set the whole thing to music. Marilyn and Alan Bergman have written lyrics that I can't wait to hear, because their lyrics are always, the words and the stories are always amazing. Mother Miriam, I know, is chomping at the bit with another question.
No, I'm just saying. I mean, I'm so grateful that you came all the way here at the time when no one wants to be on the freeway. And we really, really appreciate your coming to our very large studio.
Yeah, our spacious, palatial studio.
And we hope you're comfortable. We were concerned that you wouldn't be comfortable. because we used to have a big studio.
By the way, somebody asked about. We were talking about Bobby Darin, whether Miriam asked whether he was difficult to work with, and kind of asked a little nudged about Barbra Streisand because we've heard stories. Well, people are asking if Mother Miriam is difficult to work with, and the answer is yes. Just absolutely.
What a fib!
Pain in the rear.
No.
All right, it's martiniinthemorning.com. The shows we should mention again.
Can we say the times?
Friday, Saturday, and Friday in Oxnard at
8 p.m. Oxnard Performing Arts Center,
right.
and set your GPS, because if you don't know Oxnard, you'll not get out of there finding out how to get back to the 101.
I get you.
I know somebody who needs to go to that show. I wonder if he knows. He lives in Oxnard and doesn't get out very often, but I need to tell him about it.
They'll never see anything like this again.
No, and he's involved in music and in the movie business. In fact, we were talking earlier about Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, and my first knowledge of that movie was this friend of mine who picked me up at Burbank Airport 2 hours late as usual. And I had to move a script out of the front seat of his car. He had spent the afternoon with Clint Eastwood going through Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. But he lives in Oxnard. And let's be really honest. There's not a lot that happens culturally that happens in Oxnard. I mean, is that fair?
I think it's fair.
Yeah, and so I'm gonna buzz him and tell him he had to go see this show. So Friday night
in Oxnard, 8 p.m.
Right.
And my wife, by the way, it comes with the ticket, is doing the pre-concert talk. So she will explain. She's interviewed all the principals, the Bergmans, Roger, etc. She'll be doing the pre-concert talk.
Good.
And then at 8 p.m. will be that large performing arts center along the 101 that if you've never been there, at first you think it's a hospital, and then maybe you think it might be a prison. It's not. It's a performing arts center. And it's right off the 101. So we do that at 8 p.m. on Saturday night.
So they should come around 7.
Yeah, at 7 for the pre-concert talk.
Okay, let me make sure I got it right. Friday night, Oxnard.
Yeah.
At 8 p.m.
Night is Thousand Oaks.
Saturday night's Thousand Oaks. Where's your wife doing the pre-concert talk?
All 3.
Okay, good. Okay.
At 3 venues, and on stage, 65 pieces, orchestra, Roger Kellaway, and a 24-piece choir.
Wow.
So almost 100 people on stage.
And then Sunday afternoon in Santa Monica.
Barnum Hall, and you need to allow extra time to find a parking spot because it's on Pico right near the Pico and the 10. It's a little awkward to find, but that dinner is walking distance from there as well. Where
are they having the dinner, by the way?
The dinner is at the Sheraton, which is also right on Pico.
Right.
So, and the concert hall is amazing because the way they described it, it's Barnum Santa Monica High School,
right.
And it's Art Deco. And they said it was created by the Long Beach earthquake in the 30s, and it was renovated from the Northridge earthquake. And it's when you walk in there, it's Art Deco. It's LA at its best, but on a high school campus. It's almost and with state-of-the-art sound, the whole thing.
Fabulous.
So 3 shows, again, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, Visions of America, and we're about to push send on our email newsletter. There is a link there to the Visions of America website, and I think there's information there about the 3 shows as well. So
and don't forget the dinner.
And the dinner.
Special dinner.
So, and if you're in Southern California, by all means, I mean this is going to be something that probably once in a lifetime, and it sounds like a lot of fun. And
my website also on
yes, I have a link to your website
and the tickets should be New West Symphony.
NewWestSymphony.org. Okay, perfect. Joseph Sohm and Roger Kellaway. There's something else. I was talking about the email, the newsletter, and about we're going to press send on that. It's got the bios for both of you, so people who came in late and didn't catch all of the stories can. And
it has the pictures that you sent. We were able to put that in.
Some photos, right? Those are on our website. It's martiniinthemorning.com. Steve Tyrell and Judith Hill performing with the New West Symphony and Roger Kellaway. This is Judith Hill with Steve Tyrell on martiniinthemorning.com. Steve Tyrell and Judith Hill, the title track from Steve's last album. His next album, by the way, and I'm anxious when he comes in next Tuesday. Steve's going to be in Tuesday to talk about Visions of America, but I'm also going to see if I've got his next album.
We do too.
We sat in his car one night at Vibrato. We were there to see a friend play, and Steve said, "Come on to the car," and went out to the car, and he played the Sammy Kahn project that he's been working on. And having met Tita Kahn, it was interesting because she told Steve some great stories about her late husband. But I'm anxious. I'm hoping when he comes in, he'll let us play some of the new stuff, even though it's not going to be released till sometime next year or later this year. Okay, this goes back to what I said earlier. When we do interviews here, and first of all, it's not an interview. It's like just sit around. I had a guy who's a former executive with Disney, and he's really into this music, and we were doing this whole thing, and he came in and he said, well, what are you going to ask me? I mean, he's in the corporate world. He said, do you have an outline of what you're going to ask? And I said, I have no idea. And he got really nervous. And so we're standing there in the studio, and we're getting ready to do the interview. And so I play a song and come out of the song, and I turned to him and I asked him a question, and we talked a little bit, and he said, so when are we starting the interview? And I said, we're on the air right now. But sometimes the behind the scenes, so as we started playing the song, Joseph Sohm, who took all these amazing photos in Visions of America, he said, who's that? And I said, that's Judith Hill. You said she sounds different than she sounds in the show?
Well, I've been talking to her on the phone, and I've only seen her on This Is It and doing a couple rehearsals, but I've not heard her. Yeah, I've not heard her sound like that.
Yeah, she's that was a wonderful singer. We saw her at Catalina Jazz Club with Steve last year, and I had never heard her before, other than Steve, kind of giving me the background and playing that song for us. And she's a terrific young singer, and I'm very excited to hear her in this role in Visions of America.
You belong in Washington. There's no question that this show should be on Washington.
The road. It's got to be a difficult show to travel.
Washington, that's it.
I mean, Roger, you don't like to travel. I could tell you didn't like to travel when you got to hear from Ojai.
This way, traveling this way.
But I mean,
we can travel.
How many pieces again?
Well, this show has 65.
So, but if
plus 24 voice chorus, 2 voices.
I've paid for a 65-piece orchestra before. I know that it's a unwieldy thing to do.
It's a considerable piece of change.
So you basically need somebody who has a sitting orchestra.
Yes.
At this point, yes. And it's a 50-minute show.
50? 50? Yeah. So you're not going to take these guys on the road with you?
No.
That'd be a big airplane. Yeah. It's Visions of America. I want to put Roger on the spot, and it's going to put me on the spot. It'll probably be embarrassing for me, but I'm going to do it anyway. All the stuff you've done in your career musically, we play mostly Great American Songbook standards, traditional or vintage versions, shall we say, and new versions, young artists doing these songs. And who's your if you had to pick a singer and a song, what would be at the top of the list?
I guess give me your favorite child.
I did this to David Foster a few years ago. It was really interesting, and it worked because I gave him a keyboard because he basically won't appear anywhere unless there's a piano in front of him. And I put a keyboard on it, connected it to the console. So I watched, and he was standing there when I asked him the question, and I saw his fingers start to move. So I turned it up. On the console, and it was a fun experience. I don't have that. I can't see your fingers moving or your lips moving. So I'm hoping I'll have the song. That's the embarrassing part for me. If you had to pick one?
I think for the it's hard for me to pick some of the stuff from Bobby Darin, Dr. Dolittle, After Today. It's hard for me to hear the chart for After Today because we used to do it on stage. That's one. And most of the songs that I've written in my entire life have all been for Streisand.
Really?
Yeah.
Like which of her songs? Anything we'd...
Oh, I remember talking to her about Je m'appelle Barbara. She said, why'd you like that one? Because it sold like 5 copies.
Right.
It was just one of my favorite things. I used to do funny things and put on a headset and just listen to her. Her and Michelle, just any song.
Any song.
Martina, or the songs from Yentl. Just unbelievable.
Top of the list
for you? Papa?
No, I didn't. Michel Legrand wrote it.
Oh.
You know,
Yeah.
That was,
I just have one.
That shows. And think about this. She directed that movie and left the spaces for the songs. How did she do that? And I mean, it's just amazing how smooth it is and how integrated.
And they never really honored her then, right? I remember that.
She's
that
she's
was
amazing.
politics. But that was
I got an Academy
fabulous.
Award nomination out of The Star Is Born, which
Really?
was nice. Yeah.
That was a great
Which
movie.
song? Just the whole thing? For the whole...
For the score.
For the
whole
underscore,
score.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
At that time, they had a category called adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
And I sat next to Leonard Rosenman, and my son had his first tuxedo, and Leonard Rosenman won it for Bound for Glory.
Oh.
So my son wasn't too happy.
So you had to smile and say, it's just
That's
nice
right.
to be nominated.
That's right.
Yeah.
I was going to say that I had one Bergman story as a when I was a musician, because you guys are talking high music here. I was grueling it out playing Ramada Inns with our band, and you know, my story earlier about my taste outgrowing my ability was we ultimately had this idea of doing a Michel Legrand medley, and it was in a nightclub, and so we played this Michel Legrand medley, which was really quite good. We had a black female singer that grew up with Fontilla Bass, who recently passed. But
Rescue Me, the big song.
Yeah, so we, and it's St. Louis sound, you know. And so anyway, we played this Michel Legrand medley with Bergman songs and all the way through, and then ultimately it ultimately culminated with our dismissal when the band manager, or the owner of the bar, said, "You guys are good. That's your problem. You're just too good. You ought to be playing more Doobie Brothers and less this Michael Legrand."
So
And that's honest to God truth. So we were fired several times for playing
For doing
music that was too good.
That's
good music will get you in trouble every
How did
time.
he pronounce it again? Mike Cal?
Michael Legrand.
Well, this is one that Michel Legrand did not write with Marilyn and Alan Bergman. Steve Tyrell, nice and easy. Thank you, gentlemen. Visions of America, and we'll keep you posted. All the information on the shows in our email newsletter that will be out in about 5 minutes as soon as I fix a typo and a broken link. It's martiniinthemorning.com. Steve Tyrell.